George Washington was one of the first leaders that came about around the time of the foundation of the United States, and arguably was one of the most passionate and powerful leaders. There are a lot of stories about the boy and man, some apocryphal, like the axe and the cherry tree, but many that demonstrate his values, beliefs, and desires for the country. Part of his young education was to copy out of the 110 rules of civility and decent behavior in company and conversation. Many of these rules were meant to reinforce the idea that one must be conscious of the people around us and our impact on them, being good neighbors or friends. He was known for having a fiery temper, and being the general of the Continental armies and then later first president, he would have required patience and diplomacy. One writer put it, Washington had to deal with a greater range of people, foreigners and Americans, Northerners and Southerners, officers and privates, whites, Indians, and blacks, slave and free, than any of his contemporaries. He had the hardest political task of anyone of his generation. Politeness, the first form of politics, helped him fulfill it. While in the midst of keeping up with the British armies, Washington had to manage late pay, little food and supplies, and an increasingly demoralized Continental army. One of his chief antagonists, intent on creating discord among the army, was an Irish mercenary named Thomas Conway. Talented at spreading half-truths and false narratives, it appeared that Conway was intent to plot against the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. After being wounded, what he believed to be mortally, he wrote the following to General Washington. My career will soon be over, therefore justice and truth prompt me to declare my last sentiments. You are in my eyes the great and good man. May you long enjoy the love, veneration, and esteem of these states, whose liberties you have asserted by your virtues. High praise from one of his greatest political foes, from a man who constantly conspired and plotted to weaken Washington's position. Even in his foes, he was able to inspire and impress with his character. George Washington never had just one clearly defined role. Being the commander-in-chief of the army and then president of the United States, he was also involved in the Continental Congress, Federalist and Anti-Federalist debates, the two-party system, central economic and foreign policy. He had to look for new ways to accomplish challenges that were new and unique to the formation of the army and government. He wasn't a perfect leader, and his mistakes were often loudly pointed out and circulated by his critics. He studied his critics, however, and did his best to correct his actions and learn from them. Washington's strategic prowess wasn't fantastic. As a general, he did all right. Where he did excel was in finding exceptional talent and in delegating. Henry Knox was one of the first to show loyalty. He consistently gave exceptional results and eventually rose to the rank of Major General, receiving commendation from both the French and the British. Hamilton was a seasoned politician that worked tirelessly defending Washington and keeping his critics separated and unpopular. Von Steuben replaced the aforementioned Conway. Lafayette, Greene, Morgan all played major roles in the military. During his presidency, he surrounded himself with some of these men and others. Whether they agreed with him or not, he cared more about their ability and intelligence. Jefferson and Hamilton were ideological foes, but he kept them working and communicating with each other. He understood all too well his own shortcomings and lack of education, and did his best to surround himself with men that made up for his own weaknesses. Throughout the Revolutionary War, Washington persisted through incredible challenges and problems, through hard winters, perpetually late pay, and poorly supplied. But on top of this, there were those who would purposefully interrupt the assistance the army needed. As the war was coming to a close, there fomented within the ranks of the army a group that wanted to turn the army, fresh from facing the British, toward the American government herself. That the government that abused their patriotism by neglecting both salary and gratitude, and it was now their duty to sweep from the land another tyranny. Washington, who through this whole campaign had done nothing without thinking first of his men, had suffered and starved as they did, and marched into every battle with them, now received word that his army, on the brink of victory, was to splinter and collapse. Washington was a large man, especially for his time. Seeing him address his men as he confronted the idea of insubordination would have reminded the men of the general who led them, suffered with them, and bled with them, heaping shame upon them for thinking of abandoning their office. He at last reads a letter written to Congress with the intent of reminding Congress of their obligation. Unable to read the letter to his men, he pulls out a pair of spectacles and says, "Gentlemen, you must pardon me, for I have not only grown gray but almost blind in service to my country." First, he reminded them of why they had fought, and then he reminded them that they were not the only ones to have sacrificed. The men looked up to him and saw an example of what they could be, strong and resolute in the face of division. Thank you.